us.
Hi, good afternoon, and it's a beautiful afternoon here in Thomaston, Maine. My name is John Shelley, John G. Shelley III, and my grandfather was the first, and my dad was junior, and they grew up in the Wellesley, Massachusetts area, and back in 1949, my dad got out of the Navy in 47, and my grandfather gave him a job. It didn't work out, and he had been stationed at Brunswick Naval Air Station. He was friends with L.L. Bean, and at night he would throw a bunch of guys. He had a station wagon, and they'd all go down to L.L. Bean. But he loved flying, and I'm not sure I can document the hours, but I can find it somewhere. But he used to say he had over 3,000 hours of flight time, and a lot of that came from him delivering. Every time they said they needed a plane somewhere in the United States, he said, I'm ready to go. And he'd jump in, and I got one place where it was Corpus Christi, Texas. And but he loved flying. He could look out over the edge, and it started out with him, I believe, when he was young in Wellesley. He was fascinated with flying, and he used to build model airplanes when he was 10 or 12 years old and go over behind the high school and fly those. But I have 3 books in there that came from his library, and they're all dated about the same, but he got interested with Lindbergh and his flight across, and he wrote an article for the Boston Globe, and I have the article, and it was all about Lindbergh and so on, but he kept building model planes, and I've got one in here that I've saved all these years, and it's a racing airplane. It had a McCoy Redhead, which is no longer with it, unfortunately. We can find another one. But he claimed he got a world's record set with that, and I believe it was 130 some odd miles an hour with it. They clocked the thing going around the circle. But he was very enthusiastic. Whatever he did, he was enthusiastic about it. And he was the Navy's artist at the time during the war. And he was stationed in, he left Wellesley and was stationed in Pensacola, Florida. And that's where he got his pilot's license. I have it in there framed up. And he got his pilot's license, and off he went. So they shipped him, next stop was Jacksonville, which he did not like, and always told me, don't ever go to Florida, you're going to hate it. But I ended up in Florida for a while. So he left there. They kept moving him, and every time he had a different, he loved to try any plane he could get his hands on. And you know, if somebody said, you know, you want to try this, you know, oh sure, love to jump in the thing and try it out. But his favorite airplane was a Stearman, and I think son John, looking up, you know, there was always at the Owl's Head Transportation Museum, they always fly the Stearman. And when I was tiny, just born, we lived in Brunswick, and he would come over the house and tip the wing down, and you could literally see him in the cockpit flying it. And little,
that might be the Stearman right there. Yeah, we should probably.
Yep.
Yeah.
So his favorite plane of all the planes was a Stearman. It was a biplane, and they, after the war, the crop dusters got a hold of all those Stearmans and used them all over the United States, because they could literally, like he said, float on the deck, which was the ground, and just go straight up. And he loved his aerobatics, and when I was young, we went to a couple of those air show type things, and he loved to talk about barrel rolls, falling leaves, and you know, all sorts of stunt things he could do with a Stearman. And but that was not the plane that he crashed in. The plane that he was flying was called a Kingfisher, and I have a model of the Kingfisher in there, and it was dual cockpit. He carried what he called a radio man behind him, and it had a very had a powerful engine, but it was OS2U 3 being the series. It was a third series, and but the S is for Scout, and that's what they called these Scout planes, and they were in the Navy, Marine Corps. Everybody had one of these particular kinds of planes, but they were meant to be shot off the deck of an aircraft carrier, and he got involved in it and had flown those planes successfully. He went from Jacksonville up to New York to the Bronx, and from there he got transferred to Quonset Point, Rhode Island, and they had a hangar there for that particular plane. They had a catapult chute, which I have a picture of them launching his plane straight up, and it had a very poor climbing to altitude. It took 12 minutes. Now think about it. That's forever if you're climbing. So it was not meant for anything other than the job that it had, which was to scout out whatever was going on the ground, because it had a top speed of 165 miles an hour, which is not fast when you're in an airplane. And he could obviously slow that right down. And he and his radio man, they were covering from Kittery all the way to Eastport. As far as I know, they had that whole section. And so he got stationed at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, and I guess he got his orders, and they said, "We want you to go to Brunswick Naval Air Station, where they're having the air show this weekend." He said, "Fine, I'll do it." And all they had was a grass strip up there, and they had hangars and stuff for, quarters, and I was born in September of '44, and we stayed there for a couple of years while he had this deployment. But he went from Quonset Point to Brunswick, but his assignment, which he loved, he was crazy about it, his job was to train British pilots that had come over from England, and they chose Owl's Head, the foggiest airport in the United States, period. We know that. We got a home there, we lived there, and plenty of fog. So he had the British pilots come over. They had little bit different planes, and these guys were kind of cowboys, and they liked to do things because they were out of their own country, and he was constantly telling them, "Listen, don't screw up because it's on me." And but he was the squadron leader. He was not the commander of the base, but he opened that up, and it was just a grass strip, and he told them not to pave it in July. They paved it anyway, and they had quite a number of crashes because the guys weren't used to getting down on them, and he was involved in those crashes because he was training these pilots. And but at one point he told me about the engine. He crashed and the oil came over the top of his head, and it was a nasty one, but he said, he always told me, anyone you can walk away from is a good one. And that was his philosophy throughout his life. But he opened up Owl's Head, and that was in 1938. The WPA government program to keep people busy during the war went up there and built this airstrip, which was just a grass airstrip. And why the Navy decided, they picked it up in 1941. It became a Navy base, and they had opened up an extra runway, which is now closed. But his assignment was to go up there and train the British pilots in the fog. And at one point, these guys went through the Bath Bridge, and the guy was tending the bridge was a drawbridge, and the British pilots come flying down the Kennebec River and went right between the spans in the bridge and terrified the guy that was the bridge tender, and he took a lot of heat for that. So, you know, it was his assignment. But these guys were, and I've got all the pictures of his squadron and the guys that were in it, the pilots, and kind of fascinating. But as a young fellow, you know, when your dad's doing something, you just don't always pay attention. And I always heard the stories about the crash. And when I was little, I would go uptown in Portland Monument Square. Hey, John, tell us that story about the crash up there in Surrey. And they called it Frenchman's Bay, which was what the newspaper called it. But as we know, we've isolated it to Goose Rocks. And he was on night patrol in one of his patrol scout planes. And for whatever reason, all my life, he always ended his story in telling people, I just wished I knew what killed that engine. And why him and not he had wingmen on either side of him. And they circled around, and he had an inflatable vest. And he was trying to make it. At that time, there was nothing on that stretch of land on the other side of Goose Rocks. And he thought he could make it and get the plane on the ground. Now, this plane was not meant to. It had retractable wheels. As I understood it as a kid, I looked at pictures of a Kingfisher. It was a seaplane. It was meant to be launched off an aircraft carrier. It was meant to land. It was meant to be towed up on land, put in a catapult. Very different kind of a plane. But his plane had, because Brunswick was not on the coast, they retrofitted his plane and some of the others around the country so they could use it in the ocean or on dry land. And I always wondered, he would tell the story, but not in great detail about the plane and what really happened. But I always thought, all my life looking at Kingfishers, that they had a ability to be able to land on the ocean. And he was a great pilot. Why did the plane crash and sink? And, well, it wasn't meant to be on the ocean. It was meant to be on dry land. And he often referred to, you know, I think he probably agonized over the fact that the fellow behind him died in the crash. The plane flipped upside down, as I understand it. And he tried to make it to land there, but just didn't have enough airspeed. And he dropped it in the drink, and the radio man jumped in with him, and my father was trapped in the cockpit, and he had the Navy knife, which we have, and he cut himself out of the cockpit. Now, these were open cockpit planes. He'd slide it back, and you're looking in the breeze, and they were floating at, you know, maybe 100 miles an hour or less, looking for submarines. And I say, well, how do you know there's a submarine down there anyway? And say, well, it's perfectly easy. He said, you can just see them moving underwater. And sure enough, I mean, he used to tell me about different deployments that he went on, but one of them was Portland Harbor. And as far as I know, I've been told that there was a submarine sunk in Portland Harbor, which had a net all the way across it. I don't know how they did it, but they had a submarine net down there, but that was the only place. But they sunk one there, and he never, of course, would talk about where they sunk them, but he always liked to tell the story of Ellsworth, and evidently these two-man submarines were equipped with a life raft, and these guys would row the craft ashore. They were dressed in regular, everyday clothing, like the man on the street there, and they'd go in there and buy their vodka and buy their cigarettes. They had American money, and pretty well documented. It wasn't just hearsay, but they were there, and he could see him from the air, and his plane was equipped with a torpedo on the bottom of it. And it would be the same type of torpedo that a submarine, I think, I'm not a pilot, never was, but just in reading what I've read, it had a 50 caliber machine gun in the front, had another weapon in the back, and it was equipped with what he called ash cans. And they looked like a small version of a 50-gallon drum. And they were set for a particular depth. And, where he was just going along, and the back end of the plane would unfold, and these depth charges would go down and blow the submarine up. And I don't know how deep they were in the water, but, he really loved that particular aspect of his duty. And but he loved Ellsworth and the people up there. We went up to Bar Harbor once, and we were going to look at some windows for the barn. Riding along, and my dad goes, "We get to Ellsworth," and he said, "If it wasn't for the people of Ellsworth, I wouldn't be talking to you, and you wouldn't be listening." I was like, "Okay, I'll accept that." And but when he crashed, he tried to make land, couldn't make it. My understanding is, I'm not sure, that the plane flipped upside down. It just wasn't meant to land in the water. But he swam ashore, and all of the folklore and whatnot that was expressed at the time said that because he was a college swimmer and he was a rugged guy, nobody else, he was fully dressed in winter gear. And we're talking February in Maine, up along the coast. I don't know, we could research it. I would like to find out what the temperature was, but he always called it 42 degrees below zero. And I think maybe we could get back into the records and find out. But all I know is the other fellow commander didn't make it, and they searched and searched and searched for him, and went on and on and on. They never found a trace of him. Now, he had the inflatable vest. He inflated the vest. Why they couldn't find him with that flotation, nobody knows. But they combed that area for weeks up there. They had the Civil Air Patrol out of Bar Harbor. And when he went into the drink, he had a wingman on either side of him. He tried to deploy his raft, life raft, under the plane, and it did not inflate. So the two other guys dropped their rafts. They did not inflate. They were useless. They just, weren't worth climbing into. So he was pretty frustrated with that. After the incident, he documented that to the United States Navy, told them they needed to take a good hard look at why the rafts did not inflate, because if they had, he wouldn't have had to swim for it. But he swam over to Goose Rock, which right now seems to be the spot, crawled up on there, and they said they never would have found him, but he climbed up on the ledge, and it was covered with snow. And when they were looking down, oh, there he is right there. And so the Civil Air Patrol called it in, and as I understand it, the postmaster, he wasn't in Surry, up the line a ways, and he had a truck, pickup truck, or a station wagon rather, and people of Surry, I don't know how the postmaster organized a whole bunch of people that I guess rowed out. One person rowed out, put him in the boat that he was rowing, and rowed him ashore. The guys took him, put him in the back, and he was frozen stiff. And they listened. They said, "Well, he's got a heartbeat, and let's see if we can save him." But he was completely dressed in his flight gear. How he got to swim that far, there's a lot of hearsay about how far he swam, and every time he heard the story from somebody or him, or it was, nobody knows for sure until they find the plane. I'm working on that right now to pinpoint the longitude and latitude of where that plane lies on the bottom. But the Navy gave orders to Woods Hole research down Woods Hole, Mass, and they came up with a small tugboat with the idea that they were going to be able to retrieve the plane or find out why the engine quit. And they sent up a second tug, even bigger. They could not hold their position. Now I don't understand why nobody has a longitude and latitude. They dropped some depth charges, and what they wanted to get was an oil slick, which they did get. So and that was later on, and the war was beginning to wind down. They had orders to send another tug, but it never was deployed to that area. Now, when Dad hit the hospital in Ellsworth, these folks got him. He was frozen stiff, and he got to Ellsworth, and the people of that surrounding area, Surry and whatnot, knew where he was, and he had quite a following of people that looked after him and hoped he could make it. There were a lot of newspaper articles in the Boston Globe, the Ellsworth, the Bar Harbor, and we have those articles about what happened. And they packed him in ice, which I don't know how they did it, but that's the way he told it. And somehow they put him in some sort of a pan type affair where he could be stretched out. And took a long time for him to get revived, but people of Surry came by all the time and checked in on him, and were following him closely in his recovery. But he was in a coma for quite some time, and unfortunately they had to cut the blood vessels out of his legs, and he had these tremendous purple scars all over his legs, where the doctors cut the veins that were no longer able to work for him. Never caused any sort of problem with him in being mobile, but certainly not very attractive to look at. But he felt that he absolutely owed his life to the people of Surry and the people of Ellsworth, the surrounding area, and that's the way he told the story. And I guess we got somebody from Woods Hole thought the whole thing was, as my dad would say, malarkey. And I'm trying to trace that down, understand why the guy didn't give it any credibility. But yeah, this story is, obviously 80 years old or so. So it's been told numerous times. There's always a spin on it. The one thing we know, that plane's down there. It's never been retrieved. And a lobsterman there in Surry, back along, was putting out his lobster traps. And as he told the story, that point there's two bays that empty into the end of Goose Rock, and there's a tremendous amount of tide there that runs in and runs out. And but the plane is where he crashed it. It didn't. People say, oh, it drifted here, drifted there. No, they dropped the depth charges. They got the. But we have a lobsterman, crab guy. He's got a lot of sophisticated underwater sonar, depth finders and whatnot that they never had in 1943. These guys had very rudimentary bottom scanners. So we've got the sophisticated equipment now, and there's a fellow there willing to scan the bottom, but we know it's there. The lobsterman pulled up part of the wing, and he never documented where it came from, but we can find that out. And yeah, I think if we get enough people interested in this, we could maybe find other parts of the story that haven't been told yet. And I have a person that I'm working with, Michelle, and we're writing a book about Dad and his adventures, and there'll be one whole big chapter on his plane crash and how it occurred and what happened, and whether we ever really find out the whole story. But as we know, when folklore is told over and over again. It gets changed down through the years, but it's for real. And fortunately, Dad recovered, and I was born, and yeah, thankfully, the people of Surry, that postmaster that threw him in the back of the wagon, the guys that rode him ashore, if it hadn't been for them, he'd have never made it. He was frozen stiff, laying on the snow on the rock there. So I got to thank the people also. I'm alive to tell the story, and that's amazing in itself. So hopefully we're going to move forward on this and get a whole lot more information. This is just the very beginning of a whole new chapter on this particular adventure, and I look forward to doing more research. I'm in touch with Woods Hole. They have some archives there about it. I've got plenty of newspaper clippings now about it, and hopefully we're going to pull this all together, and I'm going to give a speech, I guess you call it, up in Surry at the Historical Society on the 19th this month, and hopefully by then I'll have a lot more documentation of exactly where the plane is, maybe why it crashed, I don't know, but he always said that the plane was sabotaged. I don't know, maybe somebody did, how those guys, you know, if they were infiltrating the towns along there in these two-man submarines, but I don't know how they'd ever get to Brunswick Naval Air Station after they got out of the raft. So I don't know, he just never said why the engine quit, and he obviously had his own mechanic, and they went over every single plane, and it was always a mystery, but he was just flying along, and he said he could see the lights of Bar Harbor. He said it was a beautiful winter night and crystal clear, and he could see everything, all the lights along the coast, and the engine just quit, and that plane flying as low as they did looking for submarines, it went down in a matter of minutes and into the ocean. And we're going to try to find the rest of the story, and I hope I've given some insight to folks around Surry and the surrounding area, and we're going to have more information by the 19th, I'm sure. But thank you very much for letting me tell my story of my dad. I don't know, you know, when I was little, we used to go uptown. He told the story every time we went someplace in Portland. Hey, John, tell us about that crash up there. They called it Frenchman's Bay. And, you know, he had to tell us, stop, and we'd go to Valley Steakhouse. Oh, tell us the story. Yep, over and over again. I heard the story as a little guy, but, you know, it's just one of those stories your dad tells. But now we're into it, and I look forward to doing more research. I'm dedicating everything from now on to I get more information, we can put a bow on this. Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me to give a talk about this. Thank you.
Would you like to show the picture that you have?
You can. My dad was a artist by he went to 3 different art schools. Pratt Institute was where he finished Boston School of Fine and Applied Art. He had 3 diplomas from art schools before he went in the Navy. He was the Navy's artist, and this is his rendition of me being born, and he has a flight plan to the admirals on the official Navy paper in there, and this is me as a little guy, as a pilot, dressed in exactly like he was dressed in back during the war. And I always thought, you know, pretty cute. He was a fantastic artist, and I hope I get a chance to tell the people of Surry about his adventures and the different things that he showed for artwork through the years. But I would love to get to Pensacola. I've seen pictures of what he painted and for the Navy, and articles of him of, you know, we got one at home of a machine gunner looking up at the sky and in oil. Tremendously talented guy, but that's me being born. Thank you.